We're going to start adding some darker colors to our wolf. This is 353 Cordovan NuPastel. So I'm using it to add some darker brown to the wolf's ear. Be sure and watch the introductory videos that are included with this workshop that will go in detail into how to sharpen the pastels to a point like this and give you other tips and tricks to help you along your journey in painting. So I'm just going along adding dark brown hairs as I see it. I'm using light pressure. And you can see our white hairs are still showing up. I'm using Indian Red now, 263. It's a little bit lighter and a little bit redder than the Cordovan. To put in some touches of red. This is the 305 Spruce Blue. You remember it from when we used it around the eyes. So I'm undercoating, base coating areas that are going to be black. And now I'm using my 229 black pastel to go over the areas of spruce blue. So we're building up the dark base coat of color that's going to show off our beautiful hairs. Let's back to the Cordovan, blending that black into the dark area, internal area of the ear. Now I'm using NuPastels. We're using black here to add black hairs, because they're harder than the Rembrandts. And so I'm not depositing a lot of color because I'm using a hard pastel. We're just using black to go over all of this and blend in those browns. I'm using it very, very lightly. Cordovan again. And then black over the Cordovan. I'm going to continue to use these same colors, the Cordovan, the Indian Red, and the 229 black, to build up the dark layers in the ear of the wolf. Now I need to go much darker, so here I'm using a Rembrandt 700.5 black to go into the center of that ear and add a touch of it at the top of the ear and on the sides of the hairs of the ear. Now I've zoomed in a little closer on that ear, and we're going to begin to add the same colors to the right ear and get both ears built up in darks before we add the light colors. So if the colors we're using work in the ear, if you're not sure about what to do when you're painting a particular animal, if it works in the ear, it pretty much is going to work everywhere else. So we're going to do these ears first and then move on to the rest of the wool. So this is the 263. We used the cordovan, now we're using the 263. Indian red. And our 229 black. And we'll continue to build up the darks in this ear. I'm going to speed things up a little bit for you, but we're using the same process that we used in the other ear. Now I'm using that 700.5 Rembrandt black again and I'm using it on that round end to add the darkest color to that ear and see the white hairs still show up through all of that. Now we're going to add our light hairs. This is 276 NuPastel Buff. Now I have all four edges of my stick very sharp. I'm holding the stick at a 45-degree angle and I'm placing these hairs one by one into the ear. Being very careful to follow the direction that the hair grows. So the hairs are more creamy on the outside edge. I'm still using the 276. I have more than one stick sharpened, so I can just pick another one up and continue to work without stopping to sharpen. So I'm using a corner to draw little hairs in there, and the edge to keep drawing hairs. And when the edge gets dull, I rotate it in my hand and use the next edge to keep them sharp all the time. So now I'm switching to a 299 light gray, and you can watch, I'll rotate it in my hand to get a sharp edge when that one gets dull. See, I flipped it there. And we can add these little hairs because we've built this nice dark background and we've been careful not to use too much pastel. Now I'm using a white, 211 white, and it's in a holder. These little holders are made by Intis and available from Jerry's Artorama. So I'm carefully starting to add bright white hairs. I also have several white pastels sharpened so I can use them without stopping to sharpen. And now I'm using my white charcoal pencil to draw some white hairs. You can make some nice lines with the white charcoal pencil. Back to the buff on the edge of the wolf's ear. And this is the $2.99 gray, using the corner to draw in the little hairs that are up there. Now if you'd rather use a pencil, this is a Carbothello 700 light gray pencil. So I can add little tiny hairs. This is very helpful. We add these little tiny hairs to the ear. I don't use pencils entirely for a project, but they're very helpful in small areas. So I can add these, and if you'll notice, I kind of, this is a 105 ivory to add creamy colored hairs in the ear, also made by Carbothello. And continuing to add those little tiny hairs with the 700 Carbothello pencil. I don't think it's quite dark enough, so I'm going to add a little more 229 black. And I'm going to use the sharp edge of it. I can add little short black hairs in between the other hairs as needed. And that works very well. So I'm continuing to add those little hairs with the 700. Now I have my charcoal pencil to pull up some little hairs that are on the very top of the ear. And we'll add more after we get the background in. I can use it to place little hairs in between some of my light hairs. I'm using the ivory pencil. And now I'm using that sharp end of the black to add really deep black hairs. Adding a few more gray ones. Now I'm using my white NuPastel 211 to add the brightest hairs. The 211 white is the best tool for adding the bright hairs on your animals. The pencil is nice, but it's not as bright as the 211 will be. Using the 263 NuPastel to just color a little red-brown over that ear to tone down the colors a little bit. I'm using the same colors to add the light hairs into the right ear. So I'm starting with 276 Buff. And I'm using 4 sharp edges and rotating my stick when they get dull. You can see how beautiful those hairs are. I would really rather use the sharp edges of a NuPastel to draw hair than I would pencils. But I wanted to be able to show you an alternate way to do that and get some nice details with your animals. This is also 276. It's just a different stick that has sharpened edges already, so I didn't have to stop and sharpen them. So here I'm using my Carbothello 700 light gray pencil to add some little sharp hairs into that ear. Going back to my 276 buff, to add those little hairs. And as you can see, I take my time to do this. If you want the hair to be a little brighter, just push a tiny bit harder and it makes it brighter. You want to vary the length of your hairs and always remember to keep the direction, the way that it grows on the animal. I'm switching to my 211 white to add some brighter hairs on top of the buff cream colored hairs, and use them in the center of the wolf's ear. I'm using my white charcoal pencil to draw out some hairs. Adding those little buff hairs on the edge of the wolf's ear. Using the charcoal pencil to pull up some little dark hairs onto the edge of the wolf's ear. I'm using that instead of the black NuPastel because it's not quite as dark. So always keep that in mind, what tool to use according to what results you're looking for. I'm using the Cordovan to darken the hairs in this area. And now I'm switching to the black because I want a darker hair. I'm using my 211 NuPastel to add some bright white hairs on the right ear of the wolf. I'm using my charcoal pencil to add some dark hairs and to separate some of the lighter hairs, give a little more definition. And now I'm going back to my buff. Now I'm using my 305 Spruce Blue to map in where the dark black hairs of the wolf's mask are located before I go over them with 229 black. Again, I'm doing this to make a richer black than just using black by itself. And now I'm adding some 353 Cordovan, darkening the area on the side of the wolf's face. I'm using 259 dark gray to add some dark gray to some of the areas on the wolf's face that will later be white, and also use it as a transition dark into the brown and the black areas of the wolf's face. This is a very useful color in a lot of ways. I'm going to add some around the eyes. This area is also white fur, or will be. Now I'm using my cordovan to add some brown into that area. Back to the Spruce Blue 305 NuPastel. Continuing to build that dark area, the black, where the black hairs are going to be later. And this is the 259 gray that I'm using to go over the areas around the eye that are going to be black, or going to be white, rather. I'm continuing to use the 259 gray to add dark gray onto the face of the wolf. If you don't have a 259 NuPastel, you could use the 704.3 dark gray Rembrandt. If you do, be very, very careful and use a light touch in these areas. And now I'm using the sharpened end of my black 229 NuPastel to add in the black hairs around the wolf's eye. It almost looks like he has an eyebrow, but this is his black mask. It comes out of the corner of his eye and into the hairs on the side of his face. I'm just carefully adding these. I'm not so concerned that my pastel be sharp. The black pastel is very hard, so it gives a nice line. I'm adding them now, the black hairs, into the corner of the wolf's eye. And then I can use the point of my black pastel to draw in the little tiny ones that come out from the corner of the wolf's eye. I'm going to speed this up a little bit while I continue to add these black hairs to the mask. Now, sometimes I'll use the end, and sometimes I'll use the tip of my NuPastel 229. And you can still see the white hairs that we put in initially. So when I use the tip, I'm usually wanting a softer effect. And when I use the end, it's harder and darker. So I'm just going to continue to add these black hairs around the face, over the eye, in the corner, and in the center of the wolf's face as well. Now I'm going to use a 704.3 dark gray to darken the fur on the wolf a little bit more. I'm using it on its end, and I'm using it very lightly to add some darker fur. I'm going over the entire forehead of the wolf, again darkening it down. We added one layer, and now we're going to add another layer to get it dark. I'm using my charcoal pencil to draw little hairs out from the eye. And now we're going to use our white 211 pastel to start adding a few light hairs. I'm drawing them out from the corner of the wolf's eye. They fan out just up about an inch or so in this particular area on the face. I'm carefully putting them in. And you have to really be careful of how the hairs grow around the eye. They go in different directions. So I'm going short strokes over the eye. Using the corner to draw the hairs that come out of the corner of the eye, and then under the eye. And take your time and use your edge, and when it gets dull, rotate your stick so that you get a nice sharp line. And watch how the hairs curve over the cheek of the wolf. And they come down the side of the face. Don't hurry. Don't rush this part of the process. Just enjoy painting the wolf. I'm using the white charcoal pencil to brighten up a few of the hairs that come out from the eye. And now I'm using my charcoal pencil to draw little tiny black hairs that just help the eye to look more a part of the face. And draw some little lines in to separate some of those hairs. Draw in a few more hairs with my white charcoal pencil. It's really looking nice, isn't it? I'm using my black 229 NuPastel to add in a few more black hairs. And now I'm going to use it to enter the darkest black hairs in the center of the wolf's forehead. I'm using my 211 white to add some really bright white hairs on the hairs near the eye and now on the cheek. You can see I got a little carried away there, so I can tone down that end that's too prominent with my charcoal pencil. Be sure and join me for part 3 coming up next of our glorious wolf.